I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, coming home. A historic prisoner swap freed a Wall Street Journal reporter and a former U.S. Marine who were in jail in Russia. Plea deal. The Department of Defense reaches an agreement with a trio of terrorists accused in the September 11th attacks, vowing revenge. Rising rhetoric in the Middle East between Iran and Israel. And along for the ride, why the Holy Father visited an amusement park in Italy. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Alphonsus Liguori. Our top story tonight, done deal. The U.S. celebrates the release of Americans freed in a prisoner swap with Russia, among them Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, a corporate security executive from Michigan. Both men had been convicted of espionage charges, which the U.S. considered baseless. President Joe Biden addressed the development today from the state dining room, calling it a very good afternoon. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. President Joe Biden also said today deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees.
President Joe Biden, with the families of those now freed standing behind him, discusses the U.S. and Russia completing their biggest prisoner swap in post-Soviet history.
Today we're bringing home Paul, Evan, Alsu, Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia.
The president calling it an incredible relief for all the families.
Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families.
Evan Gershkovich, arrested in March of 2023 while on a reporting trip to the Ural Mountains, and Paul Whelan, detained in December 2018 after traveling to Russia for a wedding. The swap, part of a multinational deal that set some 24 people free, followed years of secretive back-channel negotiations.
This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up. And they stood with us.
Later in the press briefing room, the U.S. National Security Advisor became emotional when he spoke about the prisoner swap.
I spent a lot of time with the families of Evan and Paul and Alsu. And most of the time, as you can imagine, those are tough conversations. But not today. Today, excuse me. Today was a very good day.
But the release of Americans comes at a price. Russia secured the freedom of its own nationals convicted of serious crimes in the West. Russia getting back Vadim Krasikov, who was convicted in Germany in 2021 of killing a former Chechen rebel in a Berlin park 2 years earlier.
It is difficult to send back a convicted criminal to secure the release of an innocent American. And yet, sometimes the choice is between doing that and consigning that person basically to live out their days in prison in a hostile foreign country.
Now, President Biden also said in his speech that as of today, his administration has brought home more than 70 Americans who were wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad. Now, later tonight, he and the Vice President will welcome home the freed Americans at Joint Base Andrews. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, joining us now is foreign affairs expert Cameron Hume, former ambassador to Algeria and currently the lead negotiator for the Richardson Center in seeking prisoner and hostage releases. Mr. Ambassador, so good to have you on the show today. We appreciate it. As we just heard from Owen Jensen, this is the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War era. Talk to us more about that and the significance.
Well, first of all, I think it's significant that it was done with a package and with support of our allies. The Russians, they don't give up something for nothing. And if we have a Russian prisoner here and they have an American prisoner, even if the terms of the imprisonment are completely different, it's bogus that they arrest the American. Generally, they will not release anyone unless they get someone back in return. This is true particularly when it involves the FSB, their intelligence agents. and the man who was convicted for assassinating someone in a Berlin park worked for the FSB. So this really involved the center of the Russian state, and it's a big deal.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit more about that too. Kind of the negotiations, what goes into that delicate dance.
Well, first of all, I think you have to find out what they're willing to put on the table, what they want put on the table in order to release the American who's been wrongly imprisoned. And so that's a question of discovery. But then, in a case like this, the Germans convicted this man. He assassinated someone in a public park. He's a murderer. He's an assassin. And we had to convince the Germans that in order to help us get back a few American citizens, they would release someone who, by every standard of right and justice, should be in a German jail today.
Yeah,
so.
It's hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around it. I guess it's sort of, a necessary evil sometimes in things like this. Why do you think this deal happened now?
Oh, one never knows. Certainly, the Biden administration has been seized with this issue for 2 or 3 years. So, I think it simply matured. And the Krasnikov, the guy in Germany, his name was been on the table for 1.5 years or 2 years. But it's hard. People have to get their heads around, yes, I'll give up someone who should be in jail. And there are always arguments against it. You remember Brittany Griner was released 2 years ago for another bad guy, Victor Bout, an arms merchant who did 12 and 14 years of his sentence. He'd be free anyway today because his sentence was going to be up. And there was a lot of opposition in this country. People said, well, you shouldn't give up Victor Bout. But frankly, I'm very glad that Brittany Griner has been playing basketball.
Before I let you go, I want to bring this up as well. I mean, it's a really monumentous day to have the Americans back. They're free, but there is one hostage still over there that a lot of people are talking about. That is Mark Fogel from Pennsylvania. Do we know why he was not part of this exchange, and will there be future negotiations to secure his release?
I don't know. I don't believe the State Department has designated Mark as wrongly detained, which is a little obscure to me. I'm not sure why that's the case. And I think it's up to us as an engaged citizenry to keep reminding whoever is in the White House, bring them home.
Ambassador Hume, thank you so much for your time today and for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, now let's bring in Mene Ukubarua, member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Mene, always good to see you, and good to see you on this day in particular. What did you think when you heard the news of Evan's release?
Well, as you've already noted, it was extremely sudden. The White House and the Wall Street Journal's own negotiating team have obviously been very secretive about the state of the negotiations, not wanting to compromise the process. And so those of us on the staff didn't know that it was coming until the news started to break. But obviously we were all elated and really thanking God that Evan is on his way home. Yeah, and I know that you and your colleagues really have been waiting a long time for this day to come. What's the feeling among everybody there right now, all of your colleagues at the Wall Street Journal? Well, this is really all of our main preoccupation. There's nothing like when one of your own gets taken captive, and especially in the midst of covering one of the most important wars going on in the face of the earth right now. We cover a broad range of subjects, but keeping Evan's story in the public eye was really the main task that we all were unified around, and we've kept vigil in the office. There were posters of his face everywhere, signs saying "Free Evan," and so the feeling now that he's coming home is a relief, obviously for his sake and for his family, and feeling that the paper has held together in a really strong way, and we're very glad that President Biden and others took up his cause effectively. Mene, have you all heard from Evan or maybe his family since he was announced freed from Russia? Do we know how he's doing, what his spirits are like? Not yet. There hasn't been any kind of direct quotation from him or message that he sent. I think that as of today, It's a long flight, obviously, from Turkey back to the United States, and the focus is on reuniting with his loved ones. But that's definitely something that we and the broader public will see in coming days. He's going to want to appear in front of the cameras and let everyone know that he's okay. Every indication is that he is, and that's going to be a wonderful continuation of this reunion.
I'm sure he'll want to tell his story too sooner rather than later. Before we let you go, Manny, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the ambassador was exactly right. This is unfortunately the way of doing business that Russia and other autocratic states have. There are still other Americans being held overseas, and I think that this story is going to ignite more pressure to get those people free too. So the cause of those folks is still ongoing.
Manny, always good to be with you. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thanks a lot, Tracy.
Well, a plea deal has been reached with the alleged terror mastermind of the attacks on September 11th. After 27 months of negotiations, the death penalty is off the table for 3 suspects, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The 3 men have agreed to answer written questions from the families of victims and survivors. The sentence will not come before 2025. All right, now to the Middle East, where thousands of people flood the streets of Tehran for the funeral of the Hamas leader killed earlier this week in a bombing. The deaths of the Hamas leader and his bodyguard are being blamed on the Israeli military. Today, mourners chanted "Death to Israel." Later, Iran's paramilitary leader said Tehran will respond to the killing, quote, at the proper time and place. In response, Israel's prime minister says his country is at, quote, a high level of readiness. Meantime, Israeli officials confirmed that the military head of Hamas was killed in a strike last month. The killings have left the U.S. and other governments scrambling to salvage talks for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. There are also fears of an all-out regional war. And now to Venezuela. Tensions are rising, and there is another day of protests following the controversial presidential elections.
Convocado, interrogado.
After being named the winner for another 6-year term, Socialist President Nicolas Maduro says that he is willing to be interrogated and investigated. And he calls on the country's highest court to do an audit. But there are concerns over the court's legitimacy. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board may be dropping hints about the future of the economy.
The economy is moving closer to the point at which it will be appropriate to reduce our policy rate.
What that may mean for the economy and your personal finances. Plus, as senators battle over the budget, it leaves a lot of legislation in limbo, including an all-important child tax credit. We have the details. Welcome back. In Tennessee, 3 more pro-lifers have been sentenced for violating the FACE Act. This follows an attempted rescue at an abortion business in 2021. The 3 were sentenced to 90 days in home detention, plus 3 years of probation. The sentencing for a 4th pro-lifer has been delayed until later this month. She is 89 years old and a survivor of a communist concentration camp. Well, the Senate headed home for their 5-week August break after failing to advance a bipartisan tax package that would bolster the child tax credit and cut taxes for businesses. It cleared the House by a wide margin earlier this year, but key Republican senators are demanding major changes and will not let the bill go forward. Republican Congressman Jason Smith, Ways and Means Committee Chair, and Democrat Ron Wyden, who heads up the Senate Finance Committee, wrote the package. It's designed to preserve tax cuts passed during the Trump administration that expire at the end of next year.
We think it's a very reasonable agreement that helps American families, it helps the American worker, and it's equally divided between individual and also business aspects.
The $78 billion bill covers tax years 2023 to 2025. It expands the child tax credit from $1,600 to $2,000 per child, adjusted for inflation. Increases low-income housing credit by 12.5%, immediately deducts research and development costs for companies, and includes money for disaster relief.
This should be a no-brainer. Right now, the only ones standing in the way are Senate Republicans. Everyone else, even House Republicans, are for this.
Studies suggest the child credit would benefit about 16 million children in low-income families. But the lead Republican on the Finance Committee, Senator Mike Crapo, issued a statement saying in part, quote, "I remain concerned the CTC provisions undermine the work requirement and represent a significant shift described by some Democrats as a down payment to transform the CTC from primarily working family tax relief into a government subsidy."
We should pass it. It's going to be good child credit for families. And I think there's a lot in there for small business and for families. Yeah, I'm hopeful we'll pass it.
There's a lot of policy in there I agree with, even stuff that the other side of the aisle is trying to put in there, but like most things we do here, it doesn't have a real pay for, so I generally vote against it if it doesn't.
Some Republicans argued they might have supported the bill if they had more time to make changes.
That should be marked up in committee. Republicans have ideas that they want to, offer on the bill. And so I think what you're going to see tomorrow is that we're not going to agree to cloture at this point because we want a process to actually amend the bill.
Other Republicans say it would be better to wait until next year.
I think we'll get a better tax package and better take care of young families with child care if the Republicans control the Senate.
The package could come up again in September when lawmakers return, but that's not a given. Much of their attention will be aimed at avoiding a government shutdown on October 1st. It could also be on the agenda during a lame duck session after the November elections. Stocks on Wall Street slumped today amid more signs the U.S. economy's growth is slowing down. The slowdown comes one day after the Federal Reserve set the stage for the first interest rate cut in 4 years. However, the data also raises concerns the U.S. economy could buckle under the weight of the high interest rates. Right now, the interest rate is around 5.5%, a 23-year high. This often leads to higher payments for mortgages as well as credit cards. And for analysis, we turn now to Patrick Horan, macroeconomist and research fellow at George Mason University's Mercatus Center. Patrick, good to be with you today. We appreciate it. So what are the chances that the Fed will cut rates in September? And tell us what that means for Americans.
Well, thanks so much for having me. So, as you said, the Fed kept its target interest rate the same this past week, but people are expecting the first rate's going to come in September. Markets are pricing in like around a 70% chance. Now, that will be contingent on data that will emerge between now and then. But right now, it seems like it's a pretty good guess that there'll be an interest rate cut then. And so, what does that mean for families? What does it mean for the broader economy? That it would be a little bit cheaper to borrow then. So if you're looking to purchase a house, then that's good news for you. It would also likely, though, interest rates on savings would go down, so you'd get less of a savings account. But right now, we're seeing inflation is still above the Fed's 2% inflation target, but it's been trending downward. And along with that, unemployment has still been very low, but it's ticked up a little bit in the past few months. The Fed's trying to balance these goals. That's why they see an interest rate cut in September as a good way to go. Yeah,
with interest rates keeping kind of level right now, talk to us about that and how does that affect things like purchasing a house for people?
Right, so the Fed's decisions when it comes to what it's setting its target interest rate affects interest rates throughout the economy, including it has an effect on mortgage rates. It's not the only thing affecting mortgage rates. So yeah, so how it sets its policy rate could make a house more expensive or less expensive. That's particularly true in the short term. However, in the medium to long term, though, really it's the supply of housing that's really a big deal, especially in this country. There's a relative lack of housing supply in a lot of in areas, particularly like the big cities where people want to live. If policymakers want to make housing more affordable, what would really behoove them to do is to make it easier to build housing, whether it's apartments or family-oriented houses like row houses, make it easier to build more homes for people.
Yeah, and we know inflation is something that's hurting so many people in so many different ways. Talk to us about that and why it is so important to bring that down, and especially as we look towards an election that's coming up in just a few months.
Right. So as I said, the Federal Reserve's goal is to have inflation be around 2% as measured by something that's called the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index. And again, it's still above that. As of last month, it was 2.5%, but it's been trending down. And there's reason to believe that in the last few months, the month-to-month rate has been looking pretty good. So the Fed is reasonably confident it's going to continue to cool, because inflation means that it's not just the prices of certain goods, it's the average price level rising. So when you have inflation that gets high, especially above target, it's very painful, especially for those on fixed income or those with lower income.
Patrick, before we wrap up, what's your prediction for the economy going forward towards the end of the year? Do you think things are going to get better, or should we kind of buckle down and wait for this to blow over?
Well, I like to be an optimist. I think it's reasonable to think that inflation is going to continue to cool. Again, unemployment has ticked up a little bit, and that's why the Fed has kind of hinted they're going to do an interest rate cut probably in September. All the people were thinking they might do one or two more before the end of the year. So yeah, it really depends, because some people were worried that inflation, as bad as it was, it's in the rearview mirror now, and the problem we may see going forward is rising unemployment, so the Fed needs to get ahead of that. So it's difficult to balance these two goals. That's why you don't want inflation to get out of control in the first place. The Fed had to raise interest rates a lot to bring inflation back down, and now there's a concern that it might overdo it, and that might create higher unemployment. But we'll see.
We will see. Thank you so much for weighing in. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, the church in Kenya, a closer look at the successes and struggles for the faithful in the East African nation. Plus, look who spent a summer afternoon at an amusement park. Tonight, an EWTN News special report, the Catholic Church in Kenya. International correspondent Colin Flynn traveled there to give us a unique perspective of the country and its relationship with the church.
Today, there are hundreds of Catholic seminarians in Kenya undergoing formation for the priesthood. The numbers are rising each year, but the faith here is being challenged, and not just by influences from outside the country, but by their very own culture and traditions as well.
Colin went to the East African nation to learn more about the faithful and the issues they're facing. While there, he worked closely with the ACI Africa team to tell the story about the church in Kenya. And we are joined now by Father Don Bosco Anyala. He is the editor-in-chief of EWTN's ACI Africa. Father Don, great to be with you, and really looking forward to this special. I know it's going to give people a unique perspective of Kenya. What would you like people to know about the Catholic Church in Kenya?
Thanks for having me. The church in Kenya is part of the church in Africa that seems to be giving hope to the universal church, where people are continually embracing the Christian faith. And this has been shown by the growing number of Catholics on the continent and here in Kenya, and the way the church is vibrant, and that people participate in Sunday worship, and that the church has, in a way, been integrated in the lives of the people of God in this country and on the continent.
Yeah, and Father John, you know, we've often heard people say that Africa is the future of the church. Tell us more about that and why people are maybe referring to it that way.
First of all, it's coming from the statistics that the Vatican releases every year, that while elsewhere the numbers seem to be reducing, here on the continent the numbers seem to be increasing. And this is from baptisms, I mean the sacrament of baptism, initiation into the Christian life, but also the vocations to priesthood and religious life, which is important because that forms part of what makes the church, that with priests, with women and men religious, then the future of the church in a way is guaranteed, that sacraments can be offered and that people can be formed into the Christian life.
Father John, before I let you go, I mean, are there challenges for the church in Kenya?
Yes. One is the fact that there could be a challenge of superficiality, that while an African is notoriously religious, there can be an influence of the traditional practices that have not been let out. But also ideologies from the West, that an African is not isolated. And with the media and the network of social media, there is a way in which these are also factors influencing an African. And so it requires more catechesis so that in a way the faith is grounded in one's life, and that the other ideological ideas from especially the West are not overshadowing the practice of faith.
Father Don Bosco Anyala, always wonderful to have you on, and really looking forward to this special. Thank you so much for your time. God bless.
God bless. Thanks.
Now you can see that EWTN News special report, the Catholic Church in Kenya tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. Do not miss it. Well, finally tonight, Pope Francis spent a summer afternoon the way many of us would like to, at an amusement park. The Holy Father traveled to Ostia, a seaside town not far from Rome, to greet a religious sister providing pastoral care to carnival and circus workers. The Holy Father took the opportunity to greet the fairground workers and circus artists who put on a show for him. At the end of his visit, the Pope blessed a statue of Our Lady, patroness of the traveling show and circus. What fun. All right, we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.
Thank you.